Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Sir Meerkat, and welcome back to the Moto Meerkat channel. So my first history-style video went down extremely well. At the time of recording this, it has almost 4,000 views, so I want to thank you all so much for the support on it. I'm super glad you enjoyed it, and hopefully you'll enjoy this one just as much. So in today's video, I was thinking of starting a little series where I explore the history behind Grand Prix. So I thought I'd start off with the British Grand Prix, because mainly it's where I'm from. Also, it does have a really rich history with multiple track changes, and just generally it looked like a fun topic. So I will only be covering the circuits that hosted an official World Championship race, so apologies to Donington Park, but there were no actual championship races. There were only non-championship races in 1937 and 1938, so those do not count. But if you do enjoy this video, be sure to drop a like on it and let me know down in the comments which Grand Prix I should cover next. But without further ado, let's begin with the history of the British Grand Prix. So Brooklands was the first purpose-built motor racing circuit in the UK. It was built near Weybridge in Surrey, and the circuit was a 3¼ mile long banked concrete oval. The circuit layout was relatively straightforward, with the only interesting difference to the usual oval being the fork. If you'd like to know more in-depth detail about the circuit in general and its now abandoned history, be sure to check out my top 5 abandoned British racetracks video. I'll leave the link in the description and in the card above, but make sure you go and check it out after this video is over. So Brooklands became a Formula 1 racing circuit in 1926, mainly due to Sir Henry Seagrave winning the 1923 French Grand Prix, and his winning of that Grand Prix raised interest for the sport domestically in the UK and demonstrated to the FIA that the advances in the British motor industry meant it deserved to receive the honour of hosting a Grand Prix. So the inaugural British Grand Prix was held at Brooklands on the 7th of August 1926. The race was organised by the Royal Automobile Club. This is the same club that hosted the car launches of Haas in 2019 and Mercedes in 2020. The race was eventually won by Robert Seneschal and Louis Wagner, driving a Delage 15 S8. The track would host another Grand Prix in 1927. The race was again won by a Delage 15 S8, but this time it was driven by Robert Benoist. However, due to the breakout of World War I, Grand Prix racing and racing altogether was stopped at the circuit after only 2 events. Most of the facilities were converted to help the war effort for the United Kingdom, and due to damages that occurred during the war due to bombings, obviously because it was now being used for creating aircraft, it was a high target for bombings from the Germans. It was considered too costly to repair the track, and this caused the owners to abandon it, and racing would never return to the oval again. From 1928 to 1947, the UK went without hosting a Formula 1 Grand Prix at all. However, in 1948, Silverstone managed to host its first of many. The original Silverstone layout was formed from the 3 disused runways of RAF Silverstone, located in Northamptonshire. The long runways were used as straights, and they were separated by 2 tight hairpins. However, for the 1949 meeting, it was decided that they would instead use the perimeter track. This track was a much more simple layout with only 8 corners, and it still somewhat resembles the layout that we have today. It was on this layout in 1951 where Ferrari won their first Grand Prix with Argentine Jose Frolian Gonzalez at the wheel. Wow, that's a bit of a mouthful. And for the 1952 event, the pits were moved from before the Woodcote corner to after the Woodcote corner. From 1955, the British Grand Prix would alternate annually between Silverstone and Aintree. The even number years would be held at Silverstone, and the odd number years would be held at Aintree. You may actually recognise the name Aintree due to its rich history in horse racing. It's located near Liverpool and has been the host of the Grand National, one of the biggest horse races in the UK since 1839. It was titled the Goodwood of the North, and the track layout looked a bit like this. It was quite a technical circuit for the time, with some nice long straights and a tight and twisty infield. The first race was held at Aintree in 1955, and it was a spectacular event. Juan Manuel Fangio and Sterling Moss took the top 2 positions on the first lap and carried on fighting throughout the race. Fangio seemed set to pass Moss on the last corner of the last lap, but he didn't, and Moss won his first ever F1 race, becoming the first ever British driver to win a Grand Prix race on British soil. That also secured a Mercedes 1-2-3-4, which, to be honest, sounds a bit like the turbo hybrid era. Aintree would go on further to host 3 more Grand Prix in 1957, 1959 and 1961, before another track would take its spot, partnering Silverstone, and soon after, the Aintree GP circuit would be closed down for good in 1964, and no racing was ever held on again. And again, if you're interested in learning more about Aintree's abandoned history, make sure you click that link below to watch the top 5 abandoned British racetracks video. In 1963, Aintree was dropped from the F1 calendar and replaced by Brands Hatch. Brands Hatch is situated in Kent, only a small drive from the capital city of London. Originally, the track only had its Indy layout, but in 1960, it was extended to form the Grand Prix layout. And it was on this layout that the first Grand Prix was held at Brands Hatch in 1964. This opening race saw Jim Clark and Graham Hill dominate the field. They led the pack by over 1 minute and 20 seconds, with only 2.8 seconds separating the two of them. John Surtees rounded out the podium to give the fans a much needed British top 3. So the track swapping that was occurring between Brands Hatch and Silverstone was actually the opposite to what happened when Aintree co-hosted the event. So for this pairing, Silverstone would host the race in the odd number years and Brands Hatch would host the race in the even number years. During its time of hosting the British Grand Prix, Brands Hatch didn't undergo any particularly serious changes. Only light updates and improvements were made to keep the track up to the standards of the day, which to be honest wasn't much. For example, in 1976, Paddock Hill Bend was made a little bit tamer by lessening the angle of the corner. And whilst all this was going on at Brands Hatch, racing was still occurring every other year at Silverstone. At the race in 1973, there was a huge 11-car pile-up on the first lap. Luckily, especially in those times, no one died in the crash. However, driver Andrea Adamic received career-ending ankle injuries. During this time, Silverstone only underwent one change to its track layout. The Woodcut chicane was added in 1975 to reduce drivers' speeds as they came through the Woodcut corner and onto the start-finish straight in a bid to increase safety. 1985 saw Keke Rosberg set the all-time F1 qualifying lap record that would stand until 2002 after he set a qualifying time with an average speed of 160.92 miles an hour. That's the average speed in the 1980s. That is mental. Now we move back to Brands Hatch. A number of people, for good reason, had concern over the speeds that these cars were reaching on the small track. However, the final nail in the coffin for this track was actually due to political reasons. The FIA, called FISA at the time, had put in place a policy that only allowed for one circuit to hold a Grand Prix for each country. Brands Hatch was perceived as a poorer facility than Silverstone, and Brands Hatch was situated in an old, dense forest with very little room for runoffs and general expansion. This meant that Silverstone and the BRDC signed a 7-year contract with F1 and FISA that would commence in 1987, leaving Silverstone as the sole British Grand Prix track. For its first solo season, the Woodcut chicane would no longer be used. Instead, the bridge chicane was put in place at the end of the Farm Straight to slow down drivers even further before they raced through the Woodcut corner. At the 1979 event, an incredible race unfolded before the eyes of the adoring British fans. Nelson Piquet had elected to run his race on the same set of tyres, not changing once. This saw Mansell chase him down, breaking the lap record 11 times in the process, and eventually passing Piquet to take the victory. The elated crowd stormed the circuit after the race to congratulate the driver, and the footage is just incredible. 1991 saw the most significant changes yet made to the Silverstone circuit. The Maggots and Beckett's S's were added, the Stowe, Vale and Club section was added, and the bridge section leading to Priory, Brooklands and Luffield was added. And in 1994, due to the tragic death of Ayrton Senna, the Abbey chicane was also added to slow down the drivers before entering the bridge complex. There were actually attempts in 2002 to bring the British Grand Prix back to Brands Hatch. However, sadly for the small track in Kent, these plans never materialised. And at the 2003 event in Silverstone, it was disrupted by a defrocked priest who ran onto the hangar straight during the race while cars were driving towards him at over 160 miles an hour. Marshals were somehow able to get him off the track before anyone was injured, and he was later arrested. But I'm thinking of doing a video on this crazy bloke in the future, so if you'd be interested in that, let me know down in the comments below. In a shocking turn of events, the British Grand Prix was actually left off the preliminary calendar altogether for the 2005 season, as the BRDC refused to pay the race fee demanded by Bernie Ecclestone. However, after a few months of negotiation, a deal was eventually made that would expire in 2009. And on the 4th of July 2008, it was announced that Donington Park had been awarded the contract to host the British Grand Prix for 10 years from 2010 to 2020. It was a huge shock to British racing fans, as the track, which had only seen a few non-championship races in the 30s, as I mentioned earlier, would finally see some real Grand Prix action. But it was not to be. In November of 2009, it was announced that Donington had failed to secure the funds necessary to host the race, and its contract was terminated. This allowed for Silverstone to renew its contract for a further 17 years, to go on until 2027. For this new contract in 2010, serious redevelopment underwent at the circuit that would significantly change the overall layout, and this redevelopment plan was estimated to cost around £5 million. The most notable addition of this redevelopment was the arena section. This section now saw drivers turn right at Abbey Corner rather than left, through Farm, Village, the Loop, Aintree, which is an obvious reference to a track I mentioned earlier, down the Wellington Straight and back into the Brooklands Luffield complex. And in addition to this, in 2011, the International Pit Straight was moved from in between Woodcote and Copse to in between Club and Abbey, thanks to the new, and may I say, beautiful wing building. Sadly, in March of the same year, Silverstone announced that the old bridge section had been decommissioned and would not be used again, and a piece of Silverstone history was no more. Finally, in July of 2017, the BRDC activated a break clause in their contract with the FIA and F1, meaning that unless a new contract was signed, 2019 would be the final British Grand Prix at the circuit. This threw the whole British Grand Prix up in the air, and many tracks, such as Donington, put themselves forward as possible hosts for the race. But in July of 2019, only a few days before the 2019 British Grand Prix, Silverstone confirmed that they had indeed extended their contract to at least 2024, and silly Donington was again made a mockery of. Poor Donington. So to conclude, Great Britain has held 74 official Grand Prix races over 3 tracks, or possibly 4 if you count Brooklands. Although we have lost these other tracks over the years, and at this current time, Silverstone continues to hold the yearly British Grand Prix. Silverstone is still a very fast and fun circuit, with average speeds in the range of 145 miles an hour for F1 cars nowadays, and the track still produces some fantastic spectacles to this day. So let's hope we can continue to see this lovely partnership between Silverstone and Formula 1 and keep Grand Prix racing on British soil into the distant future. Well, that is all for today's video, everyone. If you did enjoy learning about the history of the British Grand Prix, make sure to slap a like below and leave me a comment letting me know which was your favourite British track to ever host a Grand Prix, and which Grand Prix history should I cover next. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, because I make motorsport content very regularly. And again, thank you so much for watching. I'll see all of you meerkats later. Goodbye, guys.